Glenn, you were particularly taken by the fact that the British government appears to be changing their position towards internal combustion engines.
Yes, there was an announcement of an aspiration to phase out internal combustion engines for sale by 2035 instead of 2040. And in concert with all the stories recently about stranded assets and climate change, it just strikes one that the pace of this may move more quickly than people think.
And it may be quicker in Europe than it is here.
Definitely be quicker in Europe than it is here. I think one of the striking things, and every time I cross the Atlantic now, is how big the difference is between the focus in Europe on climate and here. And here it's changing, but in Europe it's really changing. This is absolutely front and centre on the European political agenda.
Glenn, one of the things I hear time and again is that may address the fiscal issues in Europe through the green process, that in fact investment will be required and that will actually help the growth over there. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I mean, a carbon tax can also be part of a fiscal reform for the United States, too. So we know how to do this. The question is just getting the consensus behind it. But I don't think the discussion's absent in the U.S. Many prominent investors, like BlackRock, have really weighed in on this in a very serious way.
They have, and it certainly is now ESG is I think becoming for real in boardrooms around the world. I think that's really interesting. One question is, how does that translate into sort of meaningful change beyond the financial community? And I think one place to look would be what happens through the financial sector regulation. Are the central banks, Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, has been pushing this very hard. That may be somewhere I think we see real change. The UK is obviously going to be the host for the next COP meeting this year. That's going to be a very, very big priority. I think you're right, this is an area where there's traction, but there's obviously a big difference when you've got a government that is a federal government that is really not paying any attention whatsoever.
Exactly. That's the big difference. Yeah. If you look at Europe and the United States, we're talking about the government in Europe doing this. We're talking about private industry actually, if anything, doing it despite the government, in the face of the government. Can it really work in this country without the government getting behind it?
No. I mean, in the long run, we're going to have some sort of price on carbon. And so, no, that's a public policy matter. Corporations can't solve it. But I do think the American business community is very heavily engaged, as are American investors. So I wouldn't count out the political class just yet.
I think it's less. I mean, there are some are very, very heavily engaged, but I think not everybody on this side of the Atlantic. There are definitely some who think growth is what it's all about. Right. This economy is doing very, very well. It's dynamic. Those Europeans, they're not even growing, and they're focused on the climate. I mean, I've heard that. Yeah. So I wouldn't get too complacent about what's going on here.